Do you ever feel like something is wrong when you step into the water? As if something invisible and very dangerous is watching over you, waiting for the right moment? That was how I felt that morning when my friends and I decided to spend the weekend on a wild beach. We knew that this beach was little known and far from tourist spots. That's what attracted us. The water here was crystal clear, and the sand was white and soft. It seemed like heaven on earth, and we were sure that this day would be unforgettable. But we had no idea that he would become terrible for life. The first sign that something was wrong appeared a long time ago. Josh, who had always been calm behind the wheel, suddenly started behaving very strangely. He drove off the road several times, as if trying to avoid something invisible. When we asked him what happened, he just shook his head and said he saw something strange in the water reflected in the rearview mirror. We laughed, thinking it was just the glare of the sun. But once we got to the beach and started setting up our things, it became clear that Josh wasn't the only one feeling uncomfortable. Hannah, our always cheerful friend, suddenly fell silent and began to look around in confusion. She even refused to go into the water, although she was always the first to jump into the waves. "I think I saw a shadow in the water," she said quietly, as if she was afraid someone else would hear us. We didn't give it any meaning, writing it off to her imagination. But then something happened that made our hearts beat faster. Josh's body suddenly trembled and he fell to the ground. His eyes were wide open. He was gasping for air as if someone or something was suffocating him. We rushed to him, trying to understand what was happening, but it was all in vain. His body trembled, and then he suddenly fell silent. "What was that?" asked Ben, our friend, quietly. But no one could give an answer. We decided that Josh needed to be taken to the hospital immediately. But as soon as we started to lift it, the same shadow that Hannah saw appeared again from the water. Only now we could all see it. Something dark and huge was moving slowly beneath the surface, heading straight for us. I don't remember how we ran back to the car, but my heart was beating wildly. We did not understand exactly what we saw, but one thing was clear: this place was not safe. This was only the beginning of our horror. What happened next surpassed all our worst fears. We knew something was wrong, but we still tried to explain it logically. Maybe Josh was just sick from the sun, maybe the shadow in the water was a big fish, not something supernatural. But deep down, we all understood that this was not the case. The car went silent as soon as we got onto the highway. Josh was placed in the back seat, unconscious but alive. We were all on the verge of panic, but Ben remained calm and focused, although his gaze often rested on the rearview mirror as if he expected something to follow us off the beach. The road was almost empty. Only a few cars passed by. The sky began to cover itself with dark clouds, and we were engulfed in silence, broken only by the screeching of wheels and the heavy breathing of Hannah, who was still terrified. "We should have left him there," she suddenly said. Her voice was low and detached, as if it were not her words but someone else's. "This place, it doesn't let anyone leave." "What do you mean?" I asked, trying not to panic, but her words cut through my bones. I don't know how to explain it, but something under the water. It's been following us since the beginning," Hannah answered, her hands shaking. "We've all seen it, but it could just be a fish or a shadow from the clouds." Ben tried to reassure, but there was no confidence in his voice. "We just need to get to town and get a doctor for Josh." But it turned out to be not so simple. After a few miles, the car began to behave strangely. First, it began to hum softly, then the engine died, and we were left in the middle of the road, surrounded by nothing but wildlife. Ben's attempts to restart the engine were futile. He got out of the car to check the hood, but as soon as he was away from the door, Hannah started screaming. I turned and saw her looking off into the distance, at the horizon where the sea meets the sky. "There!" she shouted, and I looked in that direction. The shadow we saw on the beach was there. She rose from the water, approaching us with incredible speed. Although it seemed impossible, something large, dark, and unrecognizable was moving straight across the water, as if chasing us. Ben rushed back to the car, but the engine still wouldn't start. I felt fear grip me, my heart pounded in my chest, and my blood pounded in my temples. All our thoughts were only about one thing: to escape from here as soon as possible. But where to run when something is chasing us straight from the sea? And then Josh woke up. His eyes were glassy. He didn't say anything. He just looked at us as if we were strangers. But there was something in his look that made me even more scared. He began to rise slowly, as if an invisible force was guiding his movements. "Josh?" I whispered, but he didn't answer. He just stood there looking at us, and then, suddenly, his hand reached for the door and he opened it. Hannah yelled as Josh got out of the car and started walking slowly towards the water. We could not believe our eyes. He was walking straight towards that shadow that was approaching us from the sea. What happened next made our fear grow into absolute terror. We froze as we watched Josh mindlessly walk towards the shadow that was now so close we could make out its outline. It was a huge, dark mass that moved against nature, as if something superhuman was controlling it. "Josh!" Ben shouted, snapping out of his shock, and ran after him, but I grabbed his arm, preventing him from making that move. "You don't have to," I whispered, keeping my eyes on Josh. Something at that moment told me that we should not get any closer. Josh continued walking, his steps slow as if he was in some kind of trance. He reached the edge of the water, and the shadow had already completely absorbed his silhouette. But what happened next was even more terrifying. The shadow stopped suddenly, and we saw it begin to rise above the water, forming some semblance of a body. It was impossible, but what we saw turned all notions of reality upside down. The shadow became more and more distinct. It formed a head, hands, but it did not look like a person, but like something else, unearthly. Josh stood motionless, his gaze fixed directly on the creature, and in an instant he began to raise his hands as if in greeting or acceptance of his fate. "What is he doing?" Hannah whispered, squeezing my hand so hard it hurt. I could not find the words to answer because I myself did not understand what was happening. And then something happened that we could never have predicted. The shadow suddenly dissolved, and Josh fell into the water like a doll that had lost all its strings. The waves engulfed his body, and he disappeared under the water, leaving no trace behind. We froze in horror, not believing our eyes. "Josh!" Ben shouted and rushed for the water, but I held him back even though it was almost impossible. It seemed to me that if he went there, we would lose him too. "Anya, let me go!" He struggled, but I held him even tighter, feeling how fear engulfed me more and more. We knew Josh was gone. He disappeared as suddenly as that shadow appeared. "We can't do anything," I finally said, although these words were difficult and incomprehensible even to me. But intuition suggested that the water was not plain. It was cursed. Ben stopped, his breathing heavy and his eyes full of hopelessness. He dropped to his knees, staring at the spot where Josh had disappeared. We all knew that we had lost him forever, and this thought struck us with its irrevocability. We remained standing, enveloped in an eerie silence. Hannah sobbed, her tears dripping onto the sand, mixing with the drops left by the waves. I felt my hand shaking, but I couldn't do anything about it. "We have to get out of here," Ben said quietly, standing up and looking around. "This place, it will destroy us if we stay." No one objected. We quickly packed up all our belongings, leaving the car and anything else that might delay us. Our only chance is to get out of here as soon as possible. But just as we set off, a sound came from the sea again, as if someone or something was screaming, breaking out from the depths. It seemed that it was not a human creature, but something else, ancient and terrible. We ran without looking back, even though the sound haunted us, making us run even faster. I felt my heart pounding in my chest, as if it was about to burst out. We ran without stopping until we reached a small hill that overlooked the beach. Turning back, we saw the shadow rise from the water again, only this time it looked even bigger and more menacing. She stopped on the shore, as if looking directly at us, and disappeared as suddenly as she appeared. We knew this was just the beginning, and that what lurks in the depths will not leave us alone until it gets what it wants. We kept walking, sticking together, even though neither of us knew where we were going. Fear gripped our hearts, and even the slightest sound made us shudder. We did not talk to each other. Each of us was absorbed in our own thoughts, our own horror. But what bothered me the most was that shadow. It looked as if it were alive, as if it had a will of its own. And the worst thing is that she seemed to know what she wanted. Ben led us forward, his eyes determined, but I could see that he was also afraid. He tried to look brave, but his eyes kept scanning the horizon as if looking for a way out of this nightmare. Hannah walked behind, her hand clenched into a fist as if trying to keep herself from completely falling apart. Her face was white, her eyes unfocused, and I felt like she might break at any moment. We walked for what seemed like hours until we finally came upon an old, grassy path that stretched deep into the forest. The forest looked dark and ominous, but we had no choice. The beach was left behind, but the fear did not go anywhere. He only became stronger, hanging over us like a heavy cloud. "We need to find a place to hide for the night," Ben said, trying to sound confident. "We cannot continue to walk in the dark." We knew he was right. In the darkness, our chances of survival were diminishing by the minute. But the thought that we would have to stay in this forest did not add optimism either. Something about it seemed wrong, just like the beach. I was troubled by the thought that we were not alone, that something or someone is watching us. We found a small space in the trees where we could build a fire and rest a bit. Neither of us wanted to be alone, so we sat in a circle with our backs to each other, trying to keep warm from the fire we had lit. Hannah, without saying a word, took out a blanket from her backpack and covered us all, although it felt like it wasn't cold at all. The darkness thickened, and the forest began to come alive. The sounds of nocturnal animals, the rustling of leaves, the wind blowing through the branches. All this added to the eeriness of our situation. We didn't speak, just sat and listened to the silence, which seemed even louder than any sound. I couldn't sleep at night. Every time my eyes closed, I saw Josh, his empty eyes, his unwavering gaze as he walked into the water. I saw a shadow rising from the sea and felt a cold sweat break out on my skin. Eventually, I gave up and just sat staring at the fire while the rest tried to sleep. Suddenly, I heard a sound. It was something quiet, almost imperceptible, but I immediately raised my head, trying to focus on him. Something was coming. I leaned forward, trying to understand where the sound was coming from. And then I saw it. Between the trees, at the edge of our little camp, stood a silhouette. He was barely visible, but I could clearly see his eyes. Cold, brilliant, glowing in the darkness. Those eyes were looking straight at me. "Ben," I whispered, but my voice was too weak. I couldn't take my eyes off those eyes. They hypnotized me, paralyzed me. "Ben!" I repeated louder, and my cry woke up the rest. Everyone quickly got up, but the silhouette had already disappeared, leaving behind only anxiety and fear. "What happened?" Ben asked, looking at me with concern. I couldn't answer, I just pointed in the direction of the trees where I saw that silhouette. "Someone's watching us," Hannah whispered, her voice shaking. "It knows where we are." "We can't stay here," Ben said, no longer trying to hide his fear. "We have to go now." But where could we go? The forest was dark and every corner of it seemed dangerous. We were surrounded and the options were dwindling, and just as we were packing up and about to move on, we heard it again. The same sound that sounded at night on the beach, a deep, drawn-out scream that came from somewhere deep in the forest. But now he was closer, much closer. The scream that came from the depths of the forest made us numb with terror. It was so piercing that it seemed to penetrate right into the soul. It was not an ordinary animal cry. It was too human, too full of pain and suffering to leave us indifferent. "We have to get out of here immediately!" Ben grabbed my hand and pulled me away from the fire. Hannah followed us, but her movements were mechanical, like she was on autopilot. All our instincts told us one thing: to run away. We moved quickly, almost running, making our way through the thickets. Every sound, every rustle made us panic. We were afraid to stop, afraid to look back. Although the night was dark and our flashlights barely illuminated the road ahead, we could not afford to stop. The fire that was left behind seemed to be the only source of warmth and safety, but we left it at the risk of further danger. The further we went, the stronger I felt that we were being followed. I didn't see anyone behind us, but the feeling was so strong that I could almost hear footsteps approaching. And the feeling that someone is watching us, someone invisible but very real, appeared again. Finally, we reached a small hill from where we could survey the area. The forest seemed like an endless ocean of darkness that was engulfing us every minute. Nothing could be seen on the horizon but trees swaying in the wind and ominous darkness. "What now?" Hannah asked, trying to keep her cool, but her voice gave off a hint of fear. Her eyes were wide open, and in them I saw a reflection of the horror that I felt myself. "We can't go back," Ben said, staring into the darkness. "We have to find a way to the city or some sort of shelter." "Perhaps it is better to stay here and wait for dawn?" suggested Hannah, but even she herself did not believe in this idea. Dawn seemed so far away, almost unreal, and we weren't sure if we would live to see it. "What if this something finds us before dawn?" I asked, trying to figure out what to do next. We were standing still, unable to make a decision, when suddenly we heard that scream again. But now it was very close, as if its source was only a few tens of meters away from us. Everything stopped at the sound of the scream. Even the wind stopped whispering between the trees. We stood looking at each other and realized we had no choice. We must flee! We didn't know what lay ahead, but staying still was even worse. We headed down the hill, hoping to find our way out of the forest. The darkness seemed thicker, and the flashlights began to flicker, as if the batteries were about to die. This made us panic even more. Our movements became more abrupt, and the fear reached its peak. And now, when we started to think that this cannot continue like this, we saw the light. It was a small, flickering light that made its way through the trees. We stopped, hoping it might be someone's house or at least some sort of shelter. "See that?" Hannah whispered, her voice barely audible. "Yeah," Ben replied, his voice tight and focused. "Maybe this is our chance." We moved towards the light, trying to be as quiet as mice. But our every step seemed too loud in this tense silence. We didn't know what to expect, but the feeling that something terrible was waiting for us never left me. We moved towards the light, almost out of breath from the tension. Every step we took sounded like a shot in this terrible silence, and we tried to tread as quietly as possible so as not to draw attention to ourselves. The light was getting closer, and with each step it became brighter, but at the same time we felt a growing sense of anxiety. Finally, we reached a place where the source of the light became more clearly visible. A small glade opened before us, in the middle of which stood an old wooden house. The light came from the window, which was half closed with a dark curtain. The house looked abandoned and gloomy, but there was something strange about it, something incomprehensible. "Someone's there," Hannah whispered, squeezing my hand. Her fingers were cold as ice, and I felt her shiver. "Quiet," Ben warned, looking around the house. "We don't know who it could be, but it's better than staying in the woods." We approached carefully, trying not to make a sound. Ben slowly made his way to the door and stopped, listening for any movement inside. It was quiet inside the house, but the lights remained on, which raised more questions. "Knock," I whispered, but Ben shook his head. "No, we have to see what's inside first," he said, and gently took hold of the doorknob. I held my breath as the door slowly opened, creaking with age. We looked inside and saw a dark corridor that stretched inside the house. There were old photographs on the walls, darkened by time, and the floor was covered with a layer of dust. Everything looked as if no one had lived here for many years. But the light coming from the other room told us that we were not alone. "Maybe someone lives here?" Hannah asked, looking around. "Or maybe we just got into someone's house and now we're disturbing their peace?" "We have to check," Ben said firmly and walked forward. We followed him. The fear that gripped my heart was becoming unbearable. I felt that something bad was about to happen, but we had no choice. We approached the door from behind which the light was shining. Ben slowly opened them, and we saw a small room lit by an old kerosene lamp on a table. There was some old furniture in the room, a table, 2 chairs, and a bed in the corner. On the wall hung an old, tattered calendar that seemed frozen in date many years ago. But the room was empty. "What is this place?" I whispered, looking around. The furniture was covered in a layer of dust, and everything looked as if no one had been there for years. But the lamp was on, which meant that someone had been here recently. "We have to find whoever lives here," Ben said. "Maybe they can help us, or at least explain where we are now." We began to carefully inspect the house, moving from one room to another. They were all empty and looked abandoned, just like the first one. The furniture was old, and the walls were stained with moisture. No signs of life except for this one lamp. We were almost done looking around the house when Hannah suddenly stopped in front of a door at the end of the hall. "This door," she whispered, "is locked." Ben tried to open the door, but it really wouldn't budge. "What could it be?" he asked, surveying the castle. "Maybe it's the basement," I said, trying to guess what might be hiding behind that door. But fear gripped my heart again. I didn't want to know what could be there.